So what exactly is ChatGPT and how exactly do you use it? We're going to find out in this video. ChatGPT has really been the talk of the internet. From people claiming that developers will run out of jobs to even schools blocking any AI tools to prevent plagiarism. It uses conversational artificial intelligence to interact with humans in a very natural and reasonable and sensible way. Now, this concept is not new. We've actually seen many chatbots in the past, and granted, a lot of them had a sad end to their life. Now, if you remember, Microsoft released their version of an AI chatbot called Tay in 2016, and that chatbot actually ended up being quite racist and a bit of an asshole. So what makes ChatGPT different, and why is it becoming such a revolution? ChatGPT is a large language chatbot, and it's based on the language GPT 3.5. And GPT 3.5 is a breadwinner here. The actual language, GPT 3.5, was trained, which basically means it was learning how to speak using large amounts of data, including information from the internet and from internet forums like Reddit, which I really think helped the language learn modern-day dialogue. The other good thing was that it was also trained using human feedback. This is called reinforcement learning with human feedback. So the AI also learned what people expected it to answer, which is why we get quite realistic answers from the bot. It also has strict rules from the developer, which is why it doesn't produce any harmful or racist content. Now, there have been cases where the general public have seemed to broken the rules and the chatbot has said something that's not too great, but majority of the time, the chatbot sticks to the rules. Also remember, because it was trained with the information on the internet at a specific point in time, it may always not be too accurate. In fact, in the homepage, it even says that the chatbot doesn't know much about anything after 2021. So now that we covered the introduction of ChatGPT, let's see how to use it and some use cases. First things first, you can go to the link chat.openai.com. It then does a quick security check, and then it gives you a brief introduction to ChatGPT. You can then sign up and create a free account. Once you sign up and create a free account, you can see this window here, and this is where we can begin to ask ChatGPT questions at the bottom. So on the homepage, ChatGPT gives you some examples of what questions you can ask. It also tells you the capabilities, such as it can remember the conversation history, so you can provide follow-up questions, and it's also trained to decline any inappropriate questions. And then lastly, the limitations, which is quite important. So it tells you that it's not always that accurate. It may occasionally produce harmful or biased content. And lastly, we've spoken about this, but because ChatGPT was trained at a specific point in time, it doesn't have much knowledge of events after 2021. So with that being said, let's ask it some questions. And let's start off with some simple questions. So let's ask it some simple objective questions. An objective question means that it gets a factual answer, such as, what's the population in the United Kingdom? So I'm going to ask it a direct question, such as, who won the Rugby World Cup in 2019? And as you can see, it gives a straightforward answer with some more additional details, like it was held in Japan and who South Africa played. What was interesting here was that it gave a fact that it was the first time that South Africa had won the Rugby World Cup since the inception of the World Cup in 1987, which is actually incorrect. I'm South African myself, and I know that we won it in 1995, which was a big thing. And then we also won it in 2007. It's interesting that it did get it wrong, and it's also a good learning point that when you use ChatGPT, you should also fact check yourself. This was a direct question, and it got that fact wrong. Now, you can also ask it follow-up questions. Follow-up questions means that we don't need to refer to our initial question. We can just write our follow-up question. So I asked it, and who was in the South African team? And now it lists the South African team that was in the squad in 2019, and it separates it by position. What about asking it subjective questions, such as, who is the most talented movie star? How well would it do? So I asked ChatGPT, as a follow-up question, who is the best player in the South African team? And straight off the bat, it tells me that it's difficult to determine who the best player was, as this is subjective matter. And then gives me a selection of players based on performances, their characteristics, etc. But that is quite a good subjective answer. The other thing you can do with ChatGPT is get it to write you recipes. So if you ask, what is the recipe for spaghetti bolognese? It gives you a recipe with ingredients and instructions. And you can even ask it as a follow-up question to create you a shopping list based on the recipe above, and it does that quite nicely. The other thing you can do is list any ingredients, and ChatGPT can tell you possible recipes. So I asked ChatGPT, I have cream, onions, pasta, rice, tomatoes, pepper, chicken, and garlic. What can I make for dinner? And it tells me, with the ingredients that I've listed, I could make the following dishes. And it lists creamy garlic pasta, creamy tomato and rice, and garlic chicken and pepper sauce. It gives me a brief description and tells me what to do. Now, is it as detailed as I want it to be? No. But it's pretty cool how it's taken quite a simple prompt and gave me 3 quite interesting options of recipes that I could try out. Let's talk about writing blog posts or any content on ChatGPT, because this has been pretty controversial. Currently, it looks like ChatGPT can only create short form content, so blog posts or essays at about 1,000 words, maybe a bit less, but the content itself can be pretty great and a good framework. So here's an example. I told ChatGPT to write an essay about the environmental issues of using petrol or gas in cars. So it's given me a really good summary about the environmental issues of using petrol in cars, but the length is obviously very short, and also the detail is quite sparse for an essay. So decent framework, but you definitely have to do more research to actually create a good essay with this. What about creative writing? I asked ChatGPT to write me a story about a girl who has issues fitting in, but then finally realizes that being herself will make her happy. ChatGPT outputs a short story about a girl named Samantha who didn't fit in because she was taller and more athletic than most of the girls in her school, and she often felt self-conscious. Eventually, she started wearing clothes that reflected who she was. She began taking part in sports and other activities that she liked. And even though Samantha was at first very worried what her friends would think, she got more confident and didn't care. And then she realizes that, hey, she's happy with herself. So as you can see, decent short story based on the prompt that I've given it. Is it college level? No, I don't even think it's high school level. But again, a good framework for you to base your ideas on. The other good use case for ChatGPT is research. You can actually do good research with ChatGPT, but remember to always fact check. So you can ask it something like this. I'm doing a project on Titanic for school. What are some cool, interesting facts about the Titanic? It then outputs a nice list of cool facts that you can go back and fact check and maybe write something about it. So it does really save some searching time for you because it just outputs your answer in a nice list. And the good thing about ChatGPT is that you can also go quite detailed. So for example, I asked what are the advantages or disadvantages of using a cloud data warehouse? And here you can see it gives me quite a nice, concise list of a topic that's quite specialized, which is great. And this is definitely something that you can use on a blog post or on an Instagram post, etc. This is another big one, resume writing on ChatGPT. So if you do want to spin up a resume on ChatGPT, you can do it quite quickly, and the template of your resume is quite decent. So this is what I said. I asked ChatGPT to write a resume for me. My name is Dee Naidu and I'm a chemical engineer. I also stated that I like data analytics, programming, and project management. And then I've listed what I've worked as. So I said I've worked as a data analyst between certain time frames. And then I say I've moved to a senior data engineer at a specific company between these time frames. So as you can see, it's a simple resume that it's outputted. But what I like is 1, the format, which is quite easy for you to copy and edit. And 2, it actually listed job descriptions of a data analyst or a data engineer without you asking it to, which again is a nice template or format to work with. Jokes on ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT can be quite funny, and yes, it can do one-liner jokes. So you can ask it maybe, can you tell me a funny dad joke? Or can you tell me a funny joke about dads? And it will output a joke. It's usually a one-liner. It may or may not be funny, depending on your humor. But the amazing part, and probably something that I was personally surprised with, is its ability to write funny speeches. So I asked ChatGPT, can you write me a funny speech about my best friend? She is turning 30, hates cheese, loves bad movies, and likes to show off her great hair. And ChatGPT actually wrote a pretty decent speech. So I'm going to read you the speech quickly because it's actually quite funny and you can see the natural humor that it uses. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate the 30th birthday of my dear best friend. Now, I know what you're thinking. 30. How could that be possible? Best friend doesn't look a day over 29. But seriously, it's hard to believe that best friend is entering her dirty 30s. I mean, who could forget the time she dragged us all to see that terrible horror movie and insisted it was a hidden gem? Or the time she proudly proclaimed her hatred for cheese only to accidentally eat a slice of it at a party and then proceed to throw up for hours. But despite her questionable taste in movies and a dairy-free diet, there's no denying that best friend has some serious hair game. I mean, have you seen those luscious locks? They're practically their own entity. I'm pretty sure they have their own Instagram account. So let's raise a glass to your best friend on a 30th birthday. Here's to many more years of bad movies, cheese-free dinners, and fabulous hair. Happy birthday. That's crazy. That's a pretty good speech to write. And if you ever do need a funny speech, then ChatGPT is your, I want to say person, but is your bot. So other than ChatGPT being funny, another good use case would be using ChatGPT for summarizing text. So for example, I asked ChatGPT to summarize this text, and it does exactly that. It outputs a text in a nice summary, gets the important information, and reduces the length. So this is also good for research. If you just want to summarize some text and not read pages of text, a good use case. And then finally, one of the most talked about points of ChatGPT is how well it does at writing code. So let's test its Python abilities. I asked ChatGPT to write a Python script that counts the number of words in a given phrase. It outputs Python code in a function called count words, and it looks pretty correct. That is what you do if you need to count the number of words in a given phrase. I like the fact that it writes comments there, and it also explains what it's done. It tells you this function first splits your input string into words using the split method, and then it returns the length of the list using len function. I can't say much about this. This is pretty correct. If you are a beginner and you're trying to figure out Python and you ask it a question and it gives you an answer like this, it's pretty solid. So let's go one step further. Let's see how advanced it can get. I asked ChatGPT to write me a Python script that tells me the sentiment of a certain phrase. And then it tells me to determine the sentiment of a phrase, you can use natural language processing. Correct. It gives me a library I can use, which is TextBlob or NLTK, definitely. And it says these libraries contain pre-trained models that can analyze the text and classify it as having positive, negative, or neutral sentiment. 100% correct. It gives me a good example in a function where the input of the function would be a phrase, and then it either outputs the sentiment, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral. So by sentiment, it means, is it a positive phrase like I love programming? Is it a negative phrase like I hate programming? Or is it a neutral phrase like I'm not too sure about programming? And again, it describes what it's done. So using ChatGPT as something to help you learn coding might actually be a good way to learn coding. Because one, it gives you an example script. It tells you what it does, and the script that it gives you is quite nicely formatted. It has comments, etc. So we covered Python. Let's check how well it does with SQL. So I asked ChatGPT, translate, get top 10 products from sales table to a SQL query. And here it tells me here's a possible SQL query that will get top 10 products from a sales table based on the number of sales. Again, it explains what it's done, and the code itself, pretty correct. I think in general, sales tables have sale amount and you would use sum instead of count, but still good assumption, good query, good explanation as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my content, please subscribe, like, comment. It means a lot, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.